รายการต่อไปนี้เป็นรายการทั่วไปสามารถรับชมได้ทุกวัย
สวัสดีค่ะมองเรามองโลกวันนี้มาฟังมุมมองของคุณฟิลเบตตี้บรรณาธิการนิตยสารด้านการศึกษาชื่อดังของอังกฤษที่ชื่อว่า Times Higher Education นิตยสารเล่มนี้มีจุดเด่นตรงที่ว่ามีการจัดอันดับมหาวิทยาลัยที่ดีที่สุดของโลกซึ่งการจัดอันดับนี้ได้รับการยอมรับว่าใช้เกณฑ์ที่เข้มข้นและผลที่ออกมาก็มีความน่าเชื่อถืออย่างสูงค่ะไปฟังกันนะคะว่าอะไรคือปัจจัยที่ทำให้มหาวิทยาลัยเป็นมหาวิทยาลัยที่ดีและแนวโน้มที่สำคัญของการศึกษาระดับมหาวิทยาลัยนั้นมีอะไรบ้างที่น่าจับตามองค่ะ Times Higher Education World University Rankings ได้จัดอันดับมหาวิทยาลัยที่ดีที่สุดในโลกในปี 2013 ถึง 2014 โดย 5 อันดับแรกได้แก่ อันดับที่ 1 สถาบันเทคโนโลยีแคลิฟอร์เนียสหรัฐอเมริกาอันดับที่ 2 มี 2 มหาวิทยาลัยมหาวิทยาลัยฮาร์วาร์ดสหรัฐอเมริกามหาวิทยาลัยออกซฟอร์ดสหราชอาณาจักรอันดับที่ 4 มหาวิทยาลัยสแตนฟอร์ดสหรัฐอเมริกาอันดับที่ 5 สถาบันเทคโนโลยีแมสซาชูเซตส์สหรัฐอเมริกาการจัดอันดับของ Times Higher Education World University Rankings ได้ใช้ตัวชี้วัด 13 ข้อในการประเมินเพื่อจัดอันดับโดยจะแบ่งตัวชี้วัดต่างๆออกเป็น 5 ด้านคือ 1. ด้านคุณภาพการสอนได้แก่ สภาพแวดล้อมในการเรียนรู้นับเป็น 30% 2. ด้านคุณภาพงานวิจัยได้แก่ ปริมาณ รายได้และชื่อเสียงของงานวิจัยนับเป็น 30% 3. ด้านการถูกอ้างอิงของงานวิจัยได้แก่ อิทธิพลของงานวิจัยนับเป็น 30% 4. ด้านรายได้จากภาคอุตสาหกรรมได้แก่ การสร้างนวัตกรรมนับเป็น 2.5% 5. ด้านความเป็นสากลได้แก่ เจ้าหน้าที่นักศึกษาและงานวิจัยนับเป็น 7.5%
Phil, how do you actually compile the World University Rankings? What are the criteria that you use?
Well, it's an absolutely huge piece of work, actually. We're looking at 60 million different citations to 6 million research papers. We're collecting survey responses from all around the world. We've collected around 60,000 responses since 2010. It's a massive piece of work, but we're using 13 separate performance indicators to try and judge a university in the round. We're trying to get a comprehensive view of what a university does. So we're looking at teaching, research, knowledge transfer, how it works with industry, as well as its international outlook as well. We think a university that's global in its aspirations should have a very strong international outlook. So we've got really the most balanced and sophisticated of the rankings, and it really does try to capture all the essential ingredients of a university.
So Caltech, California Institute of Technology, scores highest on all fronts, and that's why it's ranked first?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely outstanding across the board. I mean, it's very, very close at the top. You know, it's Harvard and Oxford University are joint number 2. So it's an extremely tight race. But Caltech, with it being a bit more smaller and more focused, has managed to really excel across the indicators. And it provides an incredibly strong teaching environment. It has a really good staff-student ratio. The students are really immersed in the research environment. So that's really what's helped it just pip Harvard and Oxford to the number 1 position.
How do you compare universities that might have different focus? Some might focus on social science and some might on science and technology. How do you compare these?
Well, we do a lot of work to try and normalize our indicators. We're trying to always compare research in a certain field with the world averages in that field. So we really try to take into account the unique mix of every institution. When we judge the quality of its research, we're judging it against the world averages in the disciplines that it specializes in. So this allows us to compare different types of institutions because we're creating benchmarks that would apply across the board, but they're specially normalized for each discipline in each field. And when we look at income and when we look at all sorts of factors, we're actually getting universities to report information at the subject level and then bringing it together into the overall world top 400 list.
Do the rankings actually help universities improve their education standard?
Yes, I mean, we actually, because we use 13 indicators, we break those scores down so a university can really start to fully understand its strengths and weaknesses. And we have trusted global benchmarks, trusted global data definitions, and we're using the very highest standards, the standards we apply to Oxford University, Harvard University, National University of Singapore. We can actually judge everybody against these high standards across a whole range of different activities. So I think they're really an important tool for university leaders and politicians to help them understand the progress the universities are making.
20 อันดับแรกของมหาวิทยาลัยที่ดีที่สุดในโลกแทบทั้งหมดเป็นมหาวิทยาลัยที่ใช้ภาษาอังกฤษเป็นหลักโดยเป็นมหาวิทยาลัยของอเมริกาถึง 15 แห่งสหราชอาณาจักร 3 แห่งและแคนาดา 1 แห่ง
How come the top, let's say, 20 universities are still English-speaking universities? Is there a bias in the way the rankings is being compiled?
I think there is a challenge for the world's scholars around language. I mean, we feel strongly that there needs to be a common language for scholarship. If you've made a great discovery here in Thailand, you want to make sure that you're working with the great universities in America or in Australia or in South America. So I do think there's a need for the world to come together with one common language of scholarship. But it does, of course, mean that some countries have a disadvantage and some countries have an advantage. They're part of that network. We do try and reflect that in the rankings. We try and do a little bit of what we call country normalization. So if a university is doing very well in research in a country that has a sort of lower level of research citations, we give them a little extra weighting. So we're trying to counter the effects of English language bias in terms of research publications. And of course what we also do is when we carry out these subjective reputation surveys, which we use as part of the formula, we're distributing that in 10 different languages and we're putting that out using United Nations data to put the right amount of surveys into Thailand, into the ASEAN region, into Asia as a whole. So we're doing a lot of work to try and counter the English language bias. But of course I think some of the successful Asian universities are increasingly publishing and teaching in English as a way of making sure the whole world understands their strengths, understands their discoveries.
If we look at the chart, the top 10 or maybe top 20, most of them are US universities. Why is that?
Well, I think it is this financial muscle. There is a real sense that money is probably the single most important driver of ranking success. You need the money to pay the salaries, to attract all the star performers. You need the money for the facilities to bring in the researchers and their teams who want to be at the cutting edge of scientific discovery, for the laboratories. You need the money to create the teaching environment that students value, the resources that students need in terms of libraries and buildings and facilities. I think money is a crucial element here. But I think America has not only got lots of money in terms of the private universities and their big endowments, they do have some fine traditions that they kind of almost perfected the model of the sort of the today's ideal university, this kind of Humboldtian ideal of a sort of research-intensive environment with undergraduates mingling with the leading professors and sort of shared creation of knowledge. They perfected that model in the sort of 40s and 50s. And I think also they tend to enjoy a lot of autonomy. So the leaders of the universities can make bold decisions, make quick decisions. They can react to the changing markets. They can be more decisive, whereas I think some universities in other countries, in continental Europe, for example, are a little bit more held back by bureaucracy and government interference. So I think those elements become important. Money and freedom and autonomy, very, very important.